Hello and welcome. My name is Alex Isles, and in today's episode we're going to be talking about the Colonia Ulpia Traiana. Hello and welcome back. Colonia Ulpia Traiana is today what we call Xanten and was a Roman city in Germany. Now if you follow the community tab on this channel, if you are subscribed, thank you very much. If you're not, this is a good time to do so, and I think you'll enjoy the content here. But if you have followed the community tab, you'll notice that I was away for a little bit across in the Netherlands. And as a part of my trip to the Netherlands, I actually got to visit an amazing park and an archaeological site in Germany called Xanten. And Xanten is an amazing site because, as you can see behind me, it was actually a Roman city. A really amazing one, and it's actually got a connection to Newcastle where I live. So the connection is actually because of in the 3rd century AD, the troops stationed in Newcastle, or at least the ones that we have a dedication stone dedicated to the wife of Septimius Severus in Newcastle, from that time was dedicated by a cohort who were raised from the Colonia Ulpia Traiana and were actually stationed in what we think is Roman Newcastle. And there's other evidence for them along Hadrian's Wall as well. So that's quite a cool connection for me to actually go to the place where the units who were stationed at Hadrian's Wall in Newcastle during the 3rd century were raised from, and to be able to see their city and understand maybe a little bit more about their life, as then they were transported across what is today the North Sea, up the River Tyne, and stayed there defending the northern frontier of the empire. The history of the site actually starts in around about 13 to 12 BC, where there were a number of legions stationed in the area because there were around about 8 to 10,000 legionaries who were basically stationed around there to defend the frontier of the Rhineland and that sort of area there against Germanic invasion. And because they've been settled there a while, they start to build a harbour for the Classis Germania, or the Roman fleet. So when they build a harbour there, they start stationing boats in the area, and it becomes a major location in the area and continues to grow and develop until 69 to 70 AD. And in 69 to 70 AD, this is when we have the Batavian Revolt. So the tribes in what is now the Netherlands, they feel as if they're being sort of oppressed by the Romans, and rightfully so, because the Romans paid a huge amount of focus on recruiting their young men into the auxiliaries because they were seen as great soldiers. They were taller than the Romans, physically strong, had a warlike attitude, and were seen as this wonderful sort of blend of Roman ally and effective soldiers that they could use in their wars. So because of this, the Batavians are seeing so many of their young men being recruited into the army that eventually they just snap. And when they snap, they just go for it. The Batavian Revolt is huge in Roman history. And because of that, the Romans have to focus a lot of troops on putting down this revolt. And after the Batavian Revolt, during the Batavian Revolt actually, you actually see what would become the Colonia Ulpia Traiana getting destroyed by the Batavians. And it's abandoned, and then it isn't until after the Batavian Revolt it's then restored, and around about 98 to 99 AD receives its Colonia status, which is massive back then because there were only around about 150 cities within the Roman Empire that actually had this urban status. So this put this northern European settlement right on the map as one of Rome's cities. And when it gets that Colonia status, a lot of the people living there at that time would have started getting Roman citizenship, and it becomes one of the multinational cities of the Roman Empire. There would be people speaking Latin, the Germanic languages, Gallic languages, possibly Britons, and alongside this as well, you've got to imagine that traders from the Mediterranean would take an interest in new markets that they could then exploit because of the fact that these Germanic or possibly Gallic, where there's a big debate about the ethnicity of the people in this area. Were they more Belgic and Gallic, or were they more Germanic? But I would sit more in the Germanic camp, but that's another matter entirely. But this new market, they would want to become Roman. they would want to Romanize. They would want to get all the benefits of Roman citizenship. So because of that, you're now seeing people from all over the empire coming to focus to trade in this location, especially when it's built onto a river. You can just see that over here on the image. So that's one of the things there. So you start seeing development, and the Colonia is actually named after Emperor Trajan, whose name was Marcus Ulpius Traianus. So when you have this, they name it the Colonia Ulpia Traiana after Emperor Trajan. So it doesn't only just have, urban status as a city, but it's also named after one of the emperors. So that's quite an important area right there. So in the 2nd century, the city really starts to develop. It gets its city walls, it gets temples added to it, bathhouses, amphitheatres, and it becomes a major Roman city in the area with a population of possibly up to 10,000 people living inside of it. And so when it gets this large area, the Rhine alongside it is now the arterial blood flow of the local area. And even though the main economy around it is agriculture, there's still going to be a lot of production here for the Roman citizens, the Roman soldiers stationed nearby, and alongside this as well for all of the facts of the needs of the empire as things are brought in as a centralized trading spot, but also as a location where you can bring resources and then distribute them out again to the local surrounding area through people buying and selling things and that sort of stuff like that. So it's the start of what we'd see as, cities appearing up in Northern Europe. So the colony starts to develop more because of that trade as well. And when the colony starts to develop more, people start making their livings and you get professional craftspeople. And just like many other Roman cities, obviously the fronts of the buildings were where you would have your shop. Then the back was where you would live, or upstairs. And then the wealthier citizens start having larger houses and are able to basically live far more comfortably with painted rooms, decorations, and able to live in that wonderful idealized Roman life with almost like villa-like housing appearing inside the wealthier parts of the town as well. So that is how it then develops in the 2nd century. But in the 3rd century, the colony is destroyed by the Franks. So the Franks, obviously a Germanic tribe, cross the Rhine and they destroy the settlement in 275 AD. When they destroy the settlement, it then isn't rebuilt until the 4th century. And then when it's rebuilt, it's much smaller and it's very much focused on the military. So the 9 central insulae, or what would be basically more understood today as maybe like quarters or city blocks if you're an American, those areas there are then used, those 9 central ones, to build a much smaller, much more fortified settlement. And that settlement there is therefore probably not going to have a civilian settlement in it anymore, but is instead focused on the military and the need to defend the Rhineland frontier. And so when it's more fortified, you see big defences, the walls get changed with much more protruding towers, artillery defences, all of that sort of stuff that we see in the late Roman Empire with a very fortified settlement right there. And that then continues through into the 5th century when finally it is then destroyed again by the Franks. And the Franks take it over, they take over that region and they settle around it. And when they settle around it, we start seeing Frankish or Germanic settlements around what previously was the Colonia Ulpia Traiana. And when you see them around it, they start using it later on as the building material. And especially in the 13th century, Xanten nearby is actually used, and especially later on in the Middle Ages, we actually see that the actual modern settlement of Xanten gets its cathedral from Roman stone. So the local church is actually built from Roman stone from the previous Colonia Ulpia Traiana. And so that's how it's all put together there. So that's quite an interesting one to actually have a look at it and understand how the settlement on the Rhine went from being a military location like many other cities in Europe. You can look at them like, for instance, obviously places like London, Colchester, York in Britain. They started off as legion settlements. And then from those legion settlements, they then grew into cities and then things that settlements that continue to be used to this day. In a similar way, the Colonia Ulpia Traiana, even though it doesn't have a natural settlement on the site that continued afterwards, it was more like how the modern city of Xanten it's more like how the modern settlement of Xanten is now slightly further outside, but the actual Colonia Ulpia Traiana wasn't actually built on. There was a small village there until they started excavating, and the archaeologists have bought up the village houses, demolished them, and then turned it into the museum park, which is an open-air living history site today, and so people can experience the Roman city and get an idea of the size of it. But at the same time, there's still this sort of connection. So after it's destroyed in the 3rd century, it's then rebuilt again in the 4th century. And when it's rebuilt again, it's a much smaller, more military area, and it's named of the 13th. So it's named after the legion that it's built around, or the settlement. And when it's named after that, it's based around the 9 central city blocks, or insulae, that the old Roman town would have had. And so it's a much smaller but fortified settlement to defend the Rhineland frontier against the incursions that were happening from the Germanic people at that time. So you get a far more concentrated military location, which probably didn't have a civilian population in there at that time. Alongside this as well, in the 5th century, it's then finally destroyed and abandoned, and you start seeing the area getting taken over by the Franks. They settle around it, and then the stone is gradually robbed over time, just like you see also on Hadrian's Wall and other Roman cities. And then eventually in the Middle Ages, it's actually used to build the local church in Xanten. So because of that, more of the Roman stone is robbed and is utilized elsewhere, which many people, obviously, when I'm doing tours, I often get, especially American customers, say to me, well, how could they do that? Well, it was pre-cut, pre-existing Roman stone lying around the place, and all over Europe that was perfect. So rather than having to set up large quarries which take up manpower, effort, all of that stuff, you've got the lovely Roman stone lying there. Just transport that slightly further down the road and you can do a brand new building project. Saves you time, money, and it's more practical, because that's just a ruin and you're just using something from a ruin to build something new that you're now using on a day-to-day basis, and is a focus of your culture, your settlement, your location, all of that. So it's a bit of a different one to how people view it today, but it's still a really important part of history to actually understand that as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a second part, which is my experience of the museum at Xanten and my thoughts on it, because it was an amazing visit for me, and I'll hopefully talk about that in the next episode and what my thoughts are about it. But I really hope you've enjoyed today's video learning about the Colonia Ulpia Traiana and basically how the settlement on the Rhine developed and basically had a huge impact on Northern Europe in that area. As always, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please do like and subscribe, and if you would like to support me further, I do also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi account, which you can find in the description below. But until next time, stay safe and well, and thank you so much for watching.